Not all right. Halfway all right. Somewhat right. And now it's all right. Again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first Talkback series of 2023. Woo! Y'all can sound more excited about it. I'm excited, okay?
It's a rainy Memorial Day.
It's a rainy Memorial Day here in Charlotte. I am Reverend Tara Gibbs. I'm your Minister of Spiritual Formation, Spiritual Growth, whatever term you'd like to use, but I am most importantly a big questioner. I love questions. And so what I love about this opportunity, we call it Myers Park Talkback, is just a few minutes to speak with the proclaimer who proclaimed for the morning, ask some questions, dive a little bit deeper, or engage in a way that maybe you didn't quite hear in the sermon. So again, we've given the opportunity for these wonderful talkback cards that are found in your pews every Sunday morning. So feel free to jot down your questions or thoughts there. We'll collect them. And if you are joining us online, you can email us your questions at talkback@myersparkbaptist.org. Even if we don't get to it today, our proclaimers are always happy to respond and email you personally to respond to your question. So all that being said, welcome again. Today, our proclaimer is none other than our very own pastor, Reverend Dr. Benjamin Boswell. Hi, Ben.
How's it going? Oh, I don't know. Is this on yet?
Yes, maybe not.
Okay.
He's still here, and I promise he will talk in just a moment. Okay, so we have a few questions. Our first question is simply this. What kind of inspired you to lean this direction in your sermon for Pentecost? This was a direction I know for me was a little different to hear. So tell us a little bit about your process.
Well, are we? Here we go. Well, there's a question in Acts 2 that really animated my process this week, and that was the question, what does this mean? And we always hear the same text on Pentecost, Acts 2, and it's been preached. I've preached it 20 times. It's been preached 20 times, very similar ways. Focusing on the people who were there and the pouring of the Spirit and the languages and what do the languages mean. But I think one of the things we often forget is that the whole, I call it the Gospel of Acts, because Luke wrote it not as a secondary book, but as the continuation of the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Acts continues with the Spirit all the way through. Everything after Acts 2 is what the Spirit continues to do. And there's something very specific about this story in Acts 8, where the Spirit prods Philip to go and speaks directly to Philip in a way that will then become unveiled and revealed further in the work of Paul and Peter and others. But Philip's the first, and he goes the farthest. And his connection, I think, is even the most surprising and possibly the most radical in all of the New Testament. And I thought, now is a time, today, this time in America, is a time for us to understand the true reality of what Pentecost means, the furthest extent of the ongoing inclusive work of the Spirit, how it continues to unfold. Spirit's always out ahead of us, always including people that the church, the world, has not yet figured out how to include fully, how to embrace fully. And I thought that by combining Acts 8 with Acts 2, that we could get a little further down the road into seeing what the Spirit means. What does Pentecost mean? What did it mean that the fire came down and the tongues and the wind blew in? What did it really mean? And so just to extend what Peter says about the Spirit pouring out on all flesh, to make that practical, to make that specific, and to see it in the story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, I thought would take us to a new place in understanding the meaning of Pentecost. I had somebody come out and say, I never understood Pentecost until today. So that's my goal. And so I feel like it was really that question, what does it mean, that started this whole thing?
And we appreciate that, because I'm sure many people were also wondering, what exactly is Pentecost, right? We see it on the church calendar, but we don't always get an opportunity to listen and explain and get a full definition. So thank you for that. So very evident in your sermon was an intentional emphasis on the LGBTQIA plus population, which leads to one of our questions here. And this person, Dev, says, this week I was reading about the Proud Boys' plans to escalate their targeting of queer people during Pride Month, which starts in June. In your opinion, what do you think it looks like for queer people to survive in a society that not only seeks to exclude and marginalize us, but seeks to extinguish our light altogether?
Give it to Dev for the heavy question. Always heavy. It wasn't just Proud Boys. There was a whole, what the Proud Boys said alerted Homeland Security, and actually our security team let us know that there's been an escalated threat for LGBTQ inclusive congregations, organizations, and events that last from now till November. So when you think about these things that you sometimes hear on the news, oh, the Proud Boys, you know, they want to, you know, hurt trans people or whatever. That actually has real life impact for organizations because it heightens the fear, the anxiety, the psychological impact and toll that takes on LGBTQ people, the anxiety and the psychological toll that takes on organizations that are trying to work toward the inclusivity and the rights of LGBTQ people. And so, you know, if the whole Department of Homeland Security says you should be escalated, then we should be escalated. And so that is concerning. I think, first of all, I can't possibly know the psychological, mental, emotional, physical impact that having people in the world that want you to be gone, that want you to be dead, does on a person, what that toll has. And we can see, I can only see it secondhand, thirdhand, when I see the rate of suicide for trans and non-binary and LGBTQ youth, and the hotlines, and what we read about the constant rate of that, the harm and the violence that trans, non-binary, LGBTQ people experience on a regular basis. It is extraordinary. And the thing that bothers me the most about it is that a lot of it is done in the name of God and is preached in churches and supported with a theology that is toxic and violent and harmful. And so somebody once asked me, what's the discernment process by which you use as a church to decide what issues you should focus on? And I think it's simple. We reverse engineer back from the things that the church has caused in the world that are horrible, right? Centuries and centuries of colonialism and genocide of indigenous people. 400 years of chattel slavery justified by Christians, by Christian theologians and Christian pastors and preachers. Now many, many years, decades of homophobia and transphobia preached by the church. LGBTQ inclusivity, right? Patriarchy that the church has grounded in Scripture. All the things that the church has wrought that are evil in the world, it is the church's responsibility to focus on those things. Now somebody says, well, we should focus on border collie rescue because I love border collies and they're really important and they need rescuing. Yes, that's true. But the church did not expressly exclude border collies or harm border collies, right? We have harmed a certain group of people. Particularly white churches have harmed a certain group of people, European churches. And therefore, those are the folks that we should be working to include, to elevate, to love, to care for, to center. And so I think our work is reverse engineered from the evil that is wrought in the world. As far as trans folks, I think, you know, it's like that Lucille Clifton quote that Mia always says. You know, every day, celebrate with me, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me but failed. And I think if I was a trans person, I would have that quote tattooed on my body and I would have it put on my mirror, and every morning I would get up and I would have a celebration like it was my birthday and Pentecost and New Year's Day and Christmas and Easter all in one, because I'm still living, I'm still alive. You know, I did not hurt myself. I did not hurt others. No one hurt me. I'm here. And the fact that I'm here is a celebration. The fact that I'm breathing is a celebration. Treating each day like that. Now, that could get exhausting. Nobody wants to party every day. I do. But not everybody wants to party every day. But I think that's the way I would go about it.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I love that reverse engineering. Not that we can't do other issues, but maybe we need to start with the harm we've caused, right? That leads to this other question, which is kind of a part two, when you already started along this path. And this person said, so what do you see as the role of the church in aiding that survival beyond inclusion? Like, how do we go beyond inclusion as a church?
That's a really important point. Someone said to me in the process of writing this sermon, some of you might not know this, some of you do, that when I write, once I get a draft, I send it out to a bunch of my colleagues who provide feedback, some of whom are on staff, some of whom are clergy that I've worked with in other places, and they provide me feedback, and I read theirs. I read Chrissy's sermon every Sunday. I read Lauren Eford's sermon every Sunday, and we share in the task. Preaching is a shared task, and it needs to be shared. Otherwise, you can become very isolated as a proclaimer, and thinking that you're doing great and wonderful, and no one's providing you any feedback on what you're doing. And it can be a very lonely thing to get up and to proclaim each and every week. So I like to share the process, and I particularly like to share the process with people who don't look like me, who have many different life experiences, who are at the different kinds of intersections of forms of oppression, women, people of color, LGBTQ folks. So I do that every week. And one person said to me this week, I love this sermon. I appreciate it. It's about inclusivity, but it needs to be stated that if inclusivity is not intentional, that we can feel like we're including people and actually subjecting them consistently to psychological harm, right? And so what's the difference between inclusion and belonging? Inclusion and leadership. When people ask me, well, how are you, Myers Park, doing on your road of inclusivity? The first thing I say is, we have LGBTQ deacon chairs. Why do I say that? I don't want them to think, oh, we just have some staff, we just have some folks in the congregation. No. LGBTQ people are so incorporated into the life of our community, we didn't even think about sexual identity as a qualification for leadership in the church. It was just, no, this is the right person. They're the best leader we have. Make them the leader. That is something that speaks to the fact that LGBTQ people belong here. They're not just been included, they're not just accepted, they're not tolerated, they belong. So how do we get to that place now with non-binary folks, trans folks, right? There is continued, I remember when the LGBTQ was LG, right? And we have LG folks that then had to go through the process of including all the others, even though they were LG and they were once excluded. They had to figure out how to bring in the rest. And now we're in a new place again with that, where we continue to have gender expression and sexual identities that we, as a community, as a society, are not fully aware of, we don't fully understand. So I think where the role of the church comes in, first and foremost, is full embrace and non-judgment. No shame, no humiliation, not even side-eye or talking to your neighbor about someone's gender identity, choice of dress, right? How they appear, how they look, how they present, as some would say, or their sexual choices. This is not our job to provide judgment on that. I think that's the first thing. We refrain from judgment, and that refraining from judgment creates a safe place for conversation and inclusion. So it's really about the community itself. I think we have to do education. First, we have to educate ourselves, and then we have to educate the community. So we've worked with a group called Identiversity as a church a number of times that talks through this kind of education that's needed. We've had conferences that Dev prepared for us last year. We have one coming up this year that's changing a little bit in how we're going to do it, but we're going to be releasing information, conversations about these topics so that people can get to know them. So I'll do a little education right now that I learned. This is something I learned I did not know. I was listening to a podcast and I heard the story of a young person named Cass. Cass grew up in a family where both of her parents had PhDs in science. These are not unintelligent country people who were not prepared for their child to go through something. But at a young age, Cass felt like they were a different gender. So Cass comes out to their parents and thinks it's going to go great because the parents are super highly educated, brilliant folks. But it doesn't go great. Mom kind of says, I'm good with this, but then continues to do what we hear from the trans community is a real problem, which is delaying any kinds of gender-affirming care. Delaying hormones, delaying surgeries. No, you can't do any of that. You need to keep thinking. Like you don't, like gaslighting, you don't know, you're gonna regret it. you don't trust yourself, you don't really believe it. What comes to find out that this highly intelligent PhD mother in science, not like in religion, crazy people, in science, was going to a website called Fourth Wave, with a 4. Fourth Wave, a site that presents itself to be feminist and attracts liberal, educated people with transphobia. They even got scientists to come up with a term that is now defunct, but the damage is done: rapid onset gender dysphoria. It's a lie. But some scientists came up with this idea, and they said that what rapid onset gender dysphoria is something that happens because this transgender phenomenon, according to this scientist, who is not a true scientist, is a social contagion, not a real thing. And it's like peer pressure. Peers are pressuring each other to become transgender. That's how the whole site is set up. And this mother, highly educated, PhD in science, has started to buy all this stuff, started to go on the community and ask questions, and has been infected by this transphobic feminism. Think about that for a second. That's scary. That's terrifying. Proponing to be a fourth wave feminist site is actually transphobic and homophobic, right? And so this mother didn't even realize that she was caught up in this. It wasn't till many years later, after lots of pain had been caused between mother and child, that the child finally found this evidence of going to this website and was able to confront their own mother with the fact that this was nonsense, not based in science, not true, and propaganda from transphobic people. That's what's going on right now out there in the world. So when you hear the word grooming on Fox, right, or some other channel, grooming, that's what they're saying. They're saying that there are they're saying that there are trans folks, LGBTQ folks that are grooming young people to become transgender, as if it were something that you could socially groom someone into, right? And not a true identity that people come to on their own, right? That's about who they really are. And so, anyway, this is what we have to pay attention to these things, because these words are not without danger and harm, and they lead to laws and bills being passed. The school board meeting here in Charlotte just a couple days ago had 100 people sign up to speak, and almost all of them were there to speak about wokeness. Wokeness, which for them includes anything about the history of slavery, anything about racism, anything about LGBTQ identity, right? And so they're intentionally targeting children now. Who's the real groomers here? Think about it for a second. Who's really grooming, right? They're going to target schools. And the real problem I see with it is not just that we've had folks like this forever, but what's going to happen is they're going to destroy and break an already fragile public education system that is hanging on by a thread in this country, which is under attack by people wanting to privatize public education and get rid of anything that could possibly be free for any American to help them through life, to get them an education. There is a concerted attack on every form of public welfare, every public good. And we have to get aware of this. We got to raise our attention, pay attention to all this, make connections, put all these things together. I think the church can be a place not only just to advocate in public education like we're doing right now. You all should sign up for Freedom School and at Pinewood, which we do every year, which Mojo supports, our Ministry of Justice and Outreach, and kind of learn about what's going on in the public school, meet some public school children, see what they're dealing with, what they're going through, get a reality check about what public education is really like, but also continue to educate yourself about the things that are facing all communities, but that are specifically targeting people of color and LGBTQ folks.
And thank you for that really extensive answer, and leads into a lot of the complexities and the intertwined and interconnectedness of these issues. So many times we hear LGBTQIA+ and think it's just just them over there, just
Right.
this one group, but it's all interconnected. I mean, race is interconnected, patriarchy is interconnected, reproductive health and justice interconnected. So,
Right.
so much good stuff. Thank you so much. We have time for one more question before I take presenter's privilege and ask my question. Do we have one more question from anyone that is joining us in person? We have time for one question. All right, Karen.
All right. We got an audience participation going on.
Yeah. Karen said she's not afraid to talk back.
So my question, and I've been thinking about this for a while, so it was interesting that you wrapped the trans issue into the sermon today, is why all of a sudden has the shift focused the spotlight on that? I mean, if you think about, certainly there are lots of people that are still in the closet about their identity, and there always have been. And yes, it's out in the open more now, but it's almost like this is the latest thing that they can pick on. And I was thinking about something we had a talk on one time a long time ago about the church being fixated on sexuality and our bodies. And isn't this just the last incarnation, I guess, is part one of my question. And why have they picked the trans issue? Is it because LG is now so accepted that they got to go to the next thing? I mean, I don't know. I just want to know your thoughts on that.
That's a great question. I think part of it is what you mentioned, that there's a broader social acceptance. The first time I preached on this text and connected it with LGBTQ issues was in 2012, 11 years ago, right before Amendment 1. And back then, I don't know the way to put this, but I pulled more punches in my sermon than I do now. But I started the sermon saying, I'm not going to tell you how to vote. I'm just going to preach the gospel, and you can decide. I don't think I would do it that way now. But anyway, so I preached this sermon about the eunuch, and I was connecting it to Amendment 1. Well, Amendment 1, right, that stuff's gone now. And there's acceptance, there's LGBTQ marriage, there's these things that have come. Now, don't think they can't be under threat. Look at the Supreme Court we have. They'll take anything you love and they'll trash it. So get ready. But we have to stay vigilant on even those things. But I think, yes, it's definitely partly this continued history in Christianity of focusing on the social control of people's bodies, particularly related to sexuality, as a hyper focus about what sin really is, and as the scariest thing. And it does tie, to me, specifically back to patriarchy. And some of you have heard me talk about the social phenomenon of witches. Not a real thing, but there's a great book about witches. It goes all the way through the history of witches. Well, what were witches really? Witches were women who had some knowledge outside of the church and the state. Usually that came from them being so in touch with creation that they knew herbs and medicine that no one else knew. They could heal people in ways that no one else could heal. And so people got freaked out. They started calling them witches because they could heal, right? So what happens is the church says, no, we have to kill them, because if they have the power to heal, they also have the power to kill us. This is particularly men, right? Men in power. If women can heal us, they might get mad and they could kill us. So we have to call them witches. So, every once in a while, society would come to a place where you need to blow off a little steam, and there'd be a witch hunt, right? And they'd go through these purgings, horrific moments where they would round up women who had this natural gifted ability of connection with creation, call them witches. And a lot of them were midwives. That's how they made their living, delivering children, providing healing in society. Before there was ever a hospital, before there was ever science, of that kind. The same thing is going on now, right? It's like there's this thing that we can't understand, that we don't know, that's outside the boundaries of the traditional family and what we want traditional family values to be, which we think is the bedrock of our society, which we think is somehow, if it erodes and falls apart, that all of America is going to fall apart too. But that's not actually true. But it's that fear in the back of our mind, and then that really, and so then people who want to whip people up into a frenzy intentionally do things like this fourth wave site or whatever news outlet and propaganda is going on, start to whip people up into a frenzy by using things like grooming and other things that they say are happening out there that are not really happening. Create a panic, right? It's a social panic right now. That's what all the banning is about. A social panic that's been fabricated and created to cause, but that causes real harm. This is the thing we have to remember. It's not just words, it's not just BS, it's real harm that's caused by the rhetoric of the social panic that oppresses psychologically and literally physically oppresses LGBTQ people and people of color, because the rhetoric of anti-wokeness is similar in that way. And I do think it's a grand distraction. And I think the church has used this for years. It's like, look over here at these people who are having sex in a way we don't want, and over here I'm going to steal from you, I'm going to take from you, I'm going to take your health care, I'm going to take your public school education, I'm going to take everything that you care about and value while you're looking over here at this sexuality, because sexuality looks, oh my, can you believe it? It's salacious, right? It's interesting, it's intriguing, it's taboo. You're looking over here at all this grooming while I'm over here taking your health care away, right? I'm over here making you compromise on an inflation situation, making you compromise on the debt, right? And taking away from public education and every other public service just so that we can get the debt ceiling raised while you're over here looking at grooming, right? It's a distraction from the real issues that we face in society. And it's a constant political, that's one of the oldest political games in the book, right? You get hot, you're getting close to the truth on something, and they say, no, look over here, right? That's why they play the news cycle now. They're going to tell you the truth, if they have to, right before or after something big happens in the news. So there's some tropical storm crushing some small town somewhere. Right after that, you'll find out that your local politician stole from you. No, but don't worry about that. We really need to get aid to these victims of this natural storm, right? And that's why we have to pay such vigilant attention. We can't trust everything that we hear on TV. We can't trust what we watch. We have to read. We have to pay attention. We have to look at multiple sources outside of our circle. And then the church has to be a place that provides education. We tried to do this some during the pandemic, and it was challenging to provide true science-based information about something that was killing people. And we couldn't trust the CDC. We couldn't trust the Department of Health. We couldn't trust anybody. We had to try to figure out what was real, even with all the politics that was making it crazy. So I think the church has a role in providing truth. This is what, right? In the truth, you will be free, Jesus said. And that's what we can do as a church.
All right, thank you again, Karen, for that question. Thank all of you for participating, for listening, for asking. If maybe a question will come up for you later, that's okay. We encourage you, you can still email us at talkback@myerspark.org. All of our, as ministers, all of our emails are also on the back of your order of worship. Feel free to send us a question. We'd be happy to engage. Thank you again, Dr. Boswell. You've given us plenty to chew on, plenty to think about, and we appreciate you. And we appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next week. Thank you again.
Thank you.